If you're reading this, you're probably confused. I know I was. I'll explain everything, but I need to start at the beginning. It's the only way any of this will make sense. It all started with that job, mall security. As prestigious and exciting as it sounds, you'd think working the graveyard shift would be the worst part, wandering empty halls in the dead of night. But honestly, the nights weren't too bad. It was the daytime that made the job miserable. Kids running wild, filming videos, spilling food and drinks everywhere. Most days, I felt more like a janitor than a guard. So I preferred the night shifts. Wandering the dark, empty corridors was eerie at first, but eventually it became peaceful. I would listen to something on my phone, do my rounds, and enjoy the quiet. Nobody ever tried to break in. Why would they? The only real excitement was when a group of teenagers tried to hide out overnight, hiding inside the playground slide at the food court. They weren't exactly stealthy. I heard them from a mile away. They were terrified when I caught them, but not nearly as terrified as they were when their parents showed up. Honestly, I missed those kinds of nights. Everything went wrong when I found the basement. At first, I entertained myself by poking around the empty kiosks. After a while, I started trying locked doors, mostly just maintenance closets, employee bathrooms, or storage rooms. Nothing interesting. Until I found a door I hadn't noticed before. It was tucked away in a dead-end hallway between a Forever 21 and a long abandoned storefront. A heavy steel door, painted a dull pale yellow, hidden behind a few forgotten mannequins. I tried my keys. I had one for every door in the place, and after some trial and error, one of them finally worked. A key I had never used before. I expected a supply room, maybe a mechanical closet, but what I found instead was a concrete staircase stretching down into darkness. Now, I knew the mall had a sublevel for plumbing and electrical systems, but this seemed different. The stairs were steep, unlit, and disappeared into an endless black. It felt wrong immediately. I shined my flashlight down the stairwell but couldn't see the bottom. The darkness just swallowed the light hole. It gave me a bad feeling. I stepped back, locked the door, and hurried through the rest of my shift. That night, I lay awake in my little apartment thinking about it. That gaping stairwell, that silence, that unknown. And I knew I had to go back. The next night, I rushed through my rounds and returned to the hidden door. It was exactly as I'd left it. Even the mannequins stood in place like silent sentinels. I wedged one of them in the doorway to keep it from closing, then stepped inside. The stairs stretched downward endlessly. I descended carefully. No handrails, no lights, just rough concrete and the sound of my own breathing. After 100 steps, the door at the top was almost out of sight. After 200, it was gone completely. I had been walking for nearly half an hour, and still nothing but steps. The walls, ceiling, and floor were all the same bare concrete, undisturbed by time or graffiti. No debris, no dust. Eventually, after what felt like forever, I saw a landing. There was only one thing there: elevator doors, old and brass-colored, with a single button and a keyhole. Desperate to leave, I inserted my master key, pressed the button, and waited. The doors opened into a surprisingly clean elevator, well-lit and old-fashioned, like the kind you'd see in a vintage hotel. I stepped inside. Only 2 buttons, up and down, but the up button didn't work. This elevator only went deeper. I panicked. I rushed back up the stairs, legs burning, heart pounding. It took forever, but eventually I reached the top. The mannequin still held the door open for me, and I slammed it shut behind me. I told myself I'd never go back, but if that were true, you wouldn't be reading this. For 3 months, I stayed away. I even started taking more day shifts just to avoid the temptation. Eventually, I found another job and gave my 2 weeks' notice. But before I left, I knew I had to see it through. I prepared carefully: extra batteries, flashlights, a charger, a small medical kit, and enough food and water to last a day or 2. I knew I wouldn't have cell service that deep underground. I descended the staircase again, key in hand. This time, I wasn't afraid, just determined. I reached the elevator, inserted the key, and stepped inside. Then I pressed the down arrow. The ride started smooth enough, but it kept going and going. 15 minutes passed, then 30. I couldn't tell if the elevator was still moving or if I had somehow gotten stuck. There were no floor indicators, no emergency buttons, nothing. Finally, after nearly 2 hours, something changed. I heard a deep, resonant sound, like a bell, and then the elevator jolted violently. We dropped, fast. I remember falling, hitting the ceiling, crashing back to the floor. My backpack was thrown around like a rag doll. Then everything went black. When I woke up, the elevator lights were out. I heard all over, but I was alive. I'd pulled out my flashlight and managed to pry the doors open wide enough to crawl through. What I saw outside stole my breath away. It was a mall, miles beneath the surface, built in the same style as the one I had left above. Silent, endless corridors, empty storefronts, dusty glass displays, lights flickering here and there. No windows, no entrances, no exits. Only endless, echoing halls. I wandered, searching for help, for a phone, a security room, anything. Every door was locked, but my master key opened them all. Every single one. There were no people, no security guards, no janitors, no customers. Only me. When exhaustion set in, I found a food court. Strangely, some of the food stalls were still stocked. Warm food, fresh smells, like someone had only just left. It made no sense. But after everything I'd been through, I was too tired to question it. I sat down at a table, flashlight flickering on the ground beside me, and ate a sandwich that shouldn't have existed. I didn't know it then, but that was only the beginning. I hadn't had Panda Express in a while, so I decided to grab some lo mein noodles and orange chicken. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't great either. After finishing, I set out to figure out where I'd sleep for the night. I ended up pushing some tables together and settling in under the open mall lights. Being found in the morning was the best-case scenario after all. I wandered to a clothing store, searching for anything soft to use as bedding. I even found a giant tortilla blanket at Spencer's, and with that I made a makeshift bed. It wasn't exactly comfortable, but it would do. Eventually, after tossing and turning, I drifted into sleep. When I woke up, I was disoriented. The lights overhead still flickered irregularly, and the mall was shrouded in dimness. I checked my phone. 3 p.m. Had I slept that long? Or was something wrong with time here? I wasn't sure. I called out into the stillness, "Hello? Is anyone there?" No answer. As I sat back at my little fort, trying to think, I heard something. Soft, rhythmic slaps, like bare feet on tile. They stopped almost as soon as they began. "Hello," I called again. 2 faint slaps echoed from across the court. Someone or something was getting closer. I tried to convince myself it was security or a stray employee, but why would they be barefoot? A figure slowly appeared, peering around the corner. It was humanoid but disturbingly wrong, gaunt, naked, with ashen skin stretched tight over sharp bones. It had long white hair and hollow black eyes. Its mouth hung slack, and from it came a raspy breath that quickly swelled into a terrible howl. It stumbled toward me, faster now, shrieking in agony. Whatever it wasn't human anymore. I ran, clutching my bag tight. I heard other sounds stirring in the distance. Was the creature's wailing a signal to others? Or did it have predators of its own? I quickly became lost in the endless maze of halls and escalators. Losing the creature wasn't difficult, it was slow. But now I was alone and disoriented. I found myself in a dark corridor where the overhead lights had gone out completely. I switched on my flashlight, moving quietly. And then I had an idea. Security officers. They would have cameras, and maybe even a way to call for help. In a mall this big, there had to be multiple officers. If I followed my instincts, maybe I could find one. I spent 2 full days wandering, sleeping inside shops and scavenging food and batteries, staying in the lit areas as much as I could. Dark zones unnerved me. They felt wrong. Finally, I found signs of life. Trash near a freezer in the food court suggested someone, or something, else was here. I pressed onward, cautiously. Eventually, I found it. A security office tucked beside the bathrooms. The door was open. Inside were string lights, a blanket piled on the chair, spare clothes. Someone had been living there. There was no phone, but the wall of surveillance screens still worked. I studied them closely. No obvious exits, but it helped to have a map. As I leaned in, the door creaked open. A man entered. Brown hair, glasses, and my exact face. It wasn't just a resemblance, it was me. We stared at each other in shock. He raised a finger to his lips and motioned for silence, urgently. I stepped away from the desk, confused. He looked thinner than me, exhausted. How long had he been here? As I moved closer, he panicked, waving his arms frantically. That's when I realized I had treated the microphone on the desk. Feedback screeched through the speakers outside. He shot me a sorrowful glance and fled without a word, leaving all his belongings behind. I fumbled to turn the microphone off, but the damage was done. The high-pitched whine of feedback echoed through the halls, and something answered back. A deep, thunderous roar, far worse than anything I had heard before. I ran. I twisted and turned through the labyrinthine corridors, trying to lose whatever had been summoned. It was fast, and it was gaining on me. Forced into a darkened hall, I used my flashlight to navigate. I tried every store handle I passed. All were locked. In desperation, I threw my flashlight down and scrambled through my caring. One key finally worked. I flung the door open and ducked inside. From behind a shelf of stuffed animals, I watched. My fallen flashlight illuminated the hallway just enough. Thundering footsteps shook the ground. Heavy, labored breathing filled the air, and then it appeared. The creature was massive, grotesque. Its gray skin sagged loosely over a hulking frame. It had huge arms tipped with thick claws, a hollow skull where a face should have been, and a ribcage ripped wide open. Its entrails hung like withered vines. It sniffed around my flashlight, then turned towards the store. Massive hands reached under the shutter. The metal screeched as it forced the door open. I crept around the shelves, inching toward the exit, but it spotted me. It crossed the store in an instant, pinning me against the wall so hard I thought my bones might snap. Then, with terrifying strength, it drove its claws into my abdomen. I screamed in agony. Everything blurred. The world went black. When I awoke, I was lying in a long concrete hall lined with bodies, half melted into the floor and walls, eerily familiar faces twisted in agony. They watched me silently, too weak to move. Staggering to my feet, clutching my wounded side, I moved toward a door in the distance. A mannequin's hand propped it open, a familiar sight. It was the same mannequin I had used long ago. I emerged into the mall once more, now even darker and more distorted than before. Those next weeks were a blur of hiding, scavenging, and healing. Slowly, my body repaired itself, far more quickly than it should have. At first, I thought it was a miracle. Now I know better. It was part of the curse. One day, I found another security office, and inside, a note much like this one. It described everything I had been through, almost word for word. You probably already understand what I'm about to say. The creatures here, the screaming wretches, the rotting bodies, the giant beast, they are us. Given enough time, we lose ourselves to madness and become part of this place. I put off writing this letter for a long time. Decades, probably. My body doesn't age properly, but my reflection reminds me of the passage of time. I've tried to end it. It doesn't work. Maybe you'll be different. Maybe you'll find a way out. I hope so. As for me, that doorway calls to me again. Perhaps it offers a kind of peace, a false death, but quieter than this endless wandering. If you survive long enough to read this, remember, change is possible. The story you write could be different. I believe in you. But if not, see you there, partner.